heal without forgetting? We're diving straight into one of the most profound dilemmas a society can ever face: the massive tension between finding national healing and preserving historical truth. It's a delicate balancing act, right? And honestly, how a nation handles it can literally define its future for generations. So here's the big question we're wrestling with today. Can Americans learn to live together again without denying what happened, without excusing cruelty, or, and this is key, without requiring harmed communities to just blindly trust people who haven't changed? We've all heard that old saying, time heals all wounds. But research actually shows that time alone doesn't heal structural divides. Without a deliberate, structured path to societal repair, time kind of just cements inequality. To make sense of all of this, we're going to look at 5 key areas: the paradox of healing, history's tragic warning, global models of peace, the psychology of civic accountability, and finally, building accountable reconciliation. The paradox of healing. Let's get into it. The paradox of healing and that inherent tension between healing and justice. Look, human reconciliation is an absolutely beautiful ideal, but balancing the desire for peace with the strict necessity of justice, that is incredibly complex. Yale historian David Blight hits the nail on the head here. He points out how the forces of reconciliation completely overwhelmed the emancipationist vision. What researchers keep finding is that if you push too fast for national unity, it usually comes at a terrible, hidden cost to marginalized communities. When a country tries to unify just by sweeping its past under the rug, that peace is almost always purchased at the expense of those who suffered the most. Moving on to history's tragic warning, specifically the failure of American Reconstruction. The aftermath of the American Civil War is basically our foundational warning about what happens when you prioritize reunion over accountability. David Blight identifies 3 competing visions that literally battled for the nation's historical memory. First, you've got the emancipationist vision, which correctly centered on liberation and constitutional equality. Then the reconciliationist vision, which focused heavily on the shared valor of soldiers, but totally ignored the war's moral causes. And finally, the white supremacist vision, which was entirely focused on segregated memory and subjugation. So, over time, that reconciliationist vision totally took over. At these big blue-gray veterans reunions, Northern and Southern white soldiers built fraternal bonds by deliberately stripping the conflict of its moral and ideological causes. It's like they romanticized the whole thing. They acted as if both sides fought for equally noble principles. And by doing that, they effectively erased the emancipationist memory from the national narrative just to achieve a comfortable but deeply flawed reunion. And that brings us to what scholars call false unity. Healing without accountability isn't actually healing, it's merely the stabilization of oppression. Think about the Gilded Age. Northern elites basically caved to Southern planters because they really needed a unified nation to push forward with industrialization. But to get that, they actively abandoned the democratic gains of Reconstruction. Sure, the country achieved unity, but it was a false unity built directly on the resubjugation of Black Americans. Let's look at global models of peace. We're going to analyze Northern Ireland and Colombia. So how do other modern nations handle this peace versus justice dilemma? Well, let's look at Northern Ireland and the 1998 Good Friday Agreement. They used a really complex system called consociationalism, which is basically just institutional engineering where opposing political elites agree to share power. And hey, it was highly successful at stopping active paramilitary warfare, But researchers are quick to point out that it locked in what's known as a negative peace. Yeah, it stopped the violence, but it left those deep sectarian divisions completely unaddressed at the societal level. Now contrast that approach with Colombia's 2016 peace agreement, which set up the Special Jurisdiction for Peace, or the JEP. Colombia went for an incredibly ambitious legal framework. They actually tried to achieve both peace and justice at the exact same time. What makes Colombia's model so unique is that it totally rejects the usual binary choice, either letting everyone go completely scot-free or throwing everyone in prison forever. Instead, it offers conditional restorative accountability. Perpetrators can actually get reduced non-jail sentences, but there's a huge catch. They only get that if they actively acknowledge the truth in a highly participatory, victim-centered process, and they have to engage in direct reparations. It literally forces a public accounting of the truth. Next up, the psychology of civic accountability, looking at the cognitive barriers to dialogue. So why does political dialogue almost always break down when we start talking about historical harm? Well, it usually comes down to cognitive dissonance. When a group is faced with hard evidence of its own complicity and cruelty, people experience intense psychological discomfort. It's just human nature. To protect their positive self-image, individuals will unconsciously use defensive cognitive strategies. Instead of challenging their own long-held beliefs, they'll actively minimize the charges, defend the unethical behavior, or worst of all, even blame the victims. To get past this massive barrier, we have to look at attribution theory and really understand the fundamental difference between an excuse and an explanation. An excuse deflects responsibility to maintain that dissonance, but an explanation provides objective context while maintaining personal agency. When citizens try to explain why their political opponents hold certain controversial views, they often get accused of justifying or excusing those views. But we absolutely must be able to factually explain and understand political behavior without endorsing it. Understanding something is not the same as excusing it. Finally, building accountable reconciliation. We're moving from dialogue to structural repair. When you contrast how different societies handle past harm, you really see three distinct socio-political states emerge. In false unity, the primary goal is just immediate stability. Past harm gets erased or minimized, and you end up with a very fragile negative peace. Then there's permanent hostility, where the goal is just outgroup defeat. Past harm is weaponized, and you basically live in active conflict. But the target we actually want is accountable reconciliation. Here the goal is genuine structural repair. Past harm is honestly investigated and acknowledged, which actually results in a durable, positive peace. So how on earth do we get there? The research points to some very specific relational interventions that successfully lower the temperature. We're talking about things like deep canvassing, which focuses on structured, empathetic listening without constantly arguing. There's moral reframing, where you translate a policy into your opponent's moral framework so they can actually hear you. Then you have citizens' assemblies taking representative juries out of the partisan arena to find common ground, and reflective, structured dialogue to really build up curiosity and intellectual humility. These are all vital grassroots tools to build interpersonal trust. But here's the thing, grassroots tools have to be paired with a structural sequence for a whole society to fully heal. The evidence maps out a pretty clear 5-step path. First, you need to uncover the uncensored truth through independent investigation. Second, require public acknowledgement from institutions and perpetrators. Third, implement direct restorative labor and material repair. Fourth, verify behavioral change, and democratic power sharing. It's only then, after those 4 rigorous steps, that a society can finally arrive at step 5, restored trust. I want to leave you with this provocative thought as we wrap up. Are we going to settle for the quiet of false unity, or will we engage in the really transformative labor of accountable reconciliation? History tells us time and time again that we simply cannot build a stable future on a foundation of unearned trust. Coexistence doesn't require us to surrender memory or justice. I highly encourage you to take these frameworks and apply them to the civic dialogue happening right now in your own communities. Thanks so much for joining me to explore this incredibly complex, vital topic. Thank you for watching. Remember, you are worth the time it takes to slow down, listen within, and care for yourself. If you found this helpful, please subscribe for more mindful insights. Until next time, take gentle care of yourself.